future and maybe seek the support of the panel members to try to guide us on what the future roadmap could look like, it's important to share with you how we ended up to this ConFex, because it was not an ad hoc event that we just decided overnight to do it, but it was a journey for a very busy year, 2024 and 2023, that landed to this event, which hopefully from that one we could have a clarity of the roadmap. What we call for now, and Luciana and Mr. Bigger in the morning said the roadmap to the COP30. Looks serious, yeah? Now the question, as you've seen, is all about sustainable food packaging and food loss and waste. We still don't have a title which really makes sense or attractive to put this together. But that's what we are trying to do, UNIDO and WPO for some time, to table this agenda, and of course linking this with the CO2 emission or with the climate action. I hope someone could help me, maybe ChatGPT could help me putting this together, coming up with a 4 words slogan that we could use to label this initiative. But for the time being, it's about sustainable food packaging, food loss and waste, and CO2 emissions or climate action. In the journey for a year and a half almost, we started with building partnerships around us, because for UNIDO we said this is a topic that is a multidisciplinary thing and we need to get partners on board. We started, of course, 2016 with WPO, and this is when we decided a year ago that, yes, let's do something at the COP. We have the Green Blue. You've listened to this video statement. There are a group of multinationals, more than 700-800 companies, so that's the private sector side. And then we had also the partnership with Informa Market, the largest exhibition provider, where they do lots of exhibitions on food packaging and packaging in general. And we are also partnering with ISO because they are working on international standard for food loss and waste management, which might come in the coming year or two. So we wanted to make sure that the partners are around us. Then we said, okay, but we have to have a narrative around this case, food loss and waste, food packaging. So again, together with our partners at WPO and Wageningen University, I'm getting there. And we tried to put the narrative in a publication to explain the role of food packaging for addressing food loss and waste. It's still not, it's final draft to be finalized still, because we are capturing all these discussions and consultations back into this document. It's like the business case we are putting forward to explain our narrative. Then we went around for our member states, and that's where I think, again, thanks to the markets and WPO, we did roundtables. We did 1 or 2 for the Arab and African National Packaging Institutes. We went to Asia for the same. We did now this ConFex, and in a few weeks we're doing the Latin American version of the roundtable. This is mainly just to have the consultation with as many national packaging institutes as possible on the same business case. So we've already now reached to more than 70 member states discussing the same topic to see if that makes sense to take up with them or not. From that, we ended up at the COP28. We didn't have any plans, to be honest. It was a small side event with WPO and IAA. But the beauty of this side event was the first time for WPO community to be on the COP. And then on the last day of the COP, we were happy to see that there was a declaration. And from that day, from that side event, we decided to do something for the COP30. So the declaration that they did in the COP28 in Dubai just put the food system and agriculture in the climate action plans. And if you really carefully look at the 3 bullet points, it's simply exactly what we had in the narrative in our business case. So there's the focus on reducing food loss and waste, the need for financial and technical support, and the need for international multi-stakeholder cooperation. So it confirmed that we were doing the right thing, but we don't have still a concrete roadmap proposal on what we could do in this regard. So that's what we say. Now, the future outlook, which is the title for this panel, the COP30 Joint Initiative on something, we still need to name it. So we have the international partners, we have the national centers, we have the industry, we have kind of a business case, we have the declaration. How do we turn this formula into something concrete as a roadmap? I don't dare to tell you what. That's why I had to call some partners and friends on the table who are kind of volunteers or asked, to try to help us in defining this roadmap. And I don't dare again to sit and discuss COP30, so I have to call on a friend, a colleague of us. I'll start with my colleague Rana Onair, who has an amazing experience in the COP stuff, let's put it that way, leading some very interesting global alliances and initiatives to help us navigate with this. I have also the pleasure to introduce Aslihan, and representing as an ex-president of the Asian Packaging Federation and coming from Turkey, looking after the Middle East, so a wide range of stakeholders from that part of the world to try to share also her views. And then I have our friend and colleague Ahmed from Nigeria, chairing the African Packaging Federation. We always keen to make sure that the voice of Africa is there to help us also navigate through the roadmap. And of course, I mean, the private sector is always for UNIB as a key partner. We cannot just have this discussion without the private sector. So we have another partner, Tetra Pak, with us, where we partner with them in a number of programs to see also how the private sector might find this interesting or just maybe a waste of time. And of course, we cannot do this discussion without our strategic partner, WPO, Luciana, it's not a choice anymore for WPO to be in or out, because we made this deal before, a year ago, so we're in. So I hope the panel will help us again to tell us if we can move forward to next year to the COP30 and guess tips, recommendations, concerns, anything that can help us out in this. So with this, maybe we start the questions. I will start with Aslihan. I understood from my colleague Rana that this COP stuff is full of negotiations and politics and navigating with governments. So, being there in the middle, with interacting with the Asian policymakers on packaging and with the Middle Eastern policymakers, any tips, recommendations, or things that you think from the political side of the story we need to look after in that journey? Please.
Thank you, Ali, and distinguished guests. It's a pleasure to be with you today. As you stated, Ali, delegates of COP recognize the priority of safeguarding food security and ending hunger, firstly. We talked today all about sustainable packaging, and I strongly believe that sustainable packaging is very critical regarding sustainable food systems. And we need to consider some key steps to take in mobilization of political support to this agenda. A couple of colleagues talked about this. Firstly, we have to bring all stakeholders together. This is the first item that we should do. And whose are those stakeholders? First, policymakers, industry representatives such as food producers, retailers, packaging manufacturers, logistics representatives, and environmental groups, researchers, universities, laboratories, and finally, of course, consumers' rights organizations. So those are the stakeholders. It should be very well explained that sustainable packaging is a frame that benefits all stakeholders, actually. It is the frame. By reducing food waste benefits for business owners, because they will increase their efficiency, and also they reduce food loss. And it benefits governments because governments want to protect the environment first. And it benefits governments because they will also need sustainable economic growth. And by focusing on sustainable packaging, actually policymakers can draw a good map or structure for their roadmap, bringing together all the stakeholders. And secondly, the proposal for this roadmap should be defined very clearly defined. We need some data for this. We talked about today about shelf life extension. So with sustainable packaging, we can increase shelf life, and we can also correct the mistakes that we do during logistics of food. So this is very important, and we need data for that. We have to convince the policymakers. And we are in UN building, so SDGs of UN clearly defines reduction of food loss or food security and waste management issues, together with some climate mitigation targets. So with sustainable packaging, we can also give some data for those targets of the United Nations or goals. And we also talked about today about standards, specifications, guidelines. So those are all data that we can offer to the policymakers. And as a third step, we find the politicians or some local authorities to support this agenda. So they should believe this. And in every country, there are some politicians and local authority representatives, so they are focusing on environmental issues. We know this, and maybe we can touch those people. For example, regarding COP30, maybe we should find some politician or local authority from Brazil that we can work together. And of course, today at the last item, it was on the agenda, consumers. So we have to raise the public awareness. So everything is ending with the consumer behavior. And for example, consumer campaigns or some projects by emphasizing how sustainable packaging can lead to less wasted food, so that consumers we can save money, which is very important. And we should focus on active support of media, like social media campaigns, or find some influencers. And by doing all these, we can send the message to the we can send or spread this message to everyone. So social media is very powerful. And also, we also talked about this issue for last couple of days. Plastic waste is almost major concern for consumers. So, plastic waste and food loss can be linked together. And we can say consumers, or we can say to policymakers that sustainable packaging will also reduce food loss and also will reduce plastic waste problems. So if we choose proper packaging. And as I know it is very long, but since this is the first question, I wanted to give some ideas. Sorry for that. My reply is always talking too much. And we need, of course, some incentives and financial support for doing all these. And governments have money. So maybe public-private partnership projects on sustainable packaging can find some support from governments. And also with some subsidies or tax breaks, if there is subsidy or tax break for a company, then that company can focus on develop or spend more money for its sustainable solution. We have to well explain all these to the policymakers, and of course educating the policymakers is very important, and we need to educate all policymakers around the world about food loss and packaging relations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was a nice way of connecting all the different things, but what I would take to the next question, that you would like to have a well-educated policymakers coming well prepared with a multi-stakeholder consultations in their countries, supported by data, so they can defend an agenda item on the COP. Hopefully I just summarized this formula very briefly, but then moving to Ahmed now, to Africa, do you think this can work, or do you think Africa might have some special attention where the way going to policymakers should be different to support such an agenda?
I want to say a big thank you to Unido and to Mr. Ali and Alexa for having given us this opportunity as Africans to be sitting on this table to have this conversation. COP30 or COP28 or 29, as you are well informed, this is a stakeholders meeting where leaders from around the world are sitting on the table to have a conversation. If you are not present in a meeting, obviously your interest will not be part of the conversation. So we are very happy that we are being invited to sit on this table and maybe in subsequent meetings so the interests of Africans can be discussed. First, you don't have a feel like to go to bed without food, hungry, waking up the next morning without breakfast, and you're then trying to study. I mean, this is a situation we find sometimes in our country where people go to school. They have a timetable for food which is called 010. You don't have breakfast, you have lunch, you don't have dinner. So which other country will be discussing hunger if not Africa or Nigeria? So I think it's a big opportunity for us to sit on the table to table our problems so that the world can see how we feel. The English people say, he who wears the shoe knows where it pinches. So if you're not in our position, you'll not be able to have the kind of conversation that we are having. Actually, Han has just talked about education. I'm proud to say I have a Nigerian here who has studied in the FHA at University of Applied Science. He has finished his master's. He's one of our students who took the one-year diploma in packaging technology. He's an industry person, having worked in industry, trained himself, took the one-year diploma in packaging technology in collaboration with Vanessa from Institute of Packaging South Africa. I mean, this is the kind of investment we are putting as individuals so that we can be able to sit on the table to have a conversation as policymakers. Because most of the people who are making these policies do not have a good knowledge of what they are discussing. I mean, this is the conversation we have had over the years. Even from yesterday to today, the same conversation you are having. How much data do these people have to be able to make this decision? They have no knowledge. You don't come to a conference and copy and go to paste in your system. For some of the students that we are even training in a one-year diploma in packaging technology, Vanessa was telling me yesterday, she has to sit down again and begin to research on the kind of questions given and the answers they have answered. For the South African case, it's completely different from Nigeria. I mean, globally, it's the same. We've been having a lot of conversation on food loss, food waste, but you know, the food system is designed in such a way that we have food processing. But in the whole of this morning, I see a conversation on the food packaging. I've not seen the conversation on food distribution. So for us, we had a conversation this morning, people were talking about food. In my country, we have a root crop called cassava. When we peel the peels from there, what do we do with it? We process them to animal feed. So we have more of a circular economy which has not been put scientifically on the table, which I think is what we need to start to discuss. Because in Africa, our systems have been well defined and put on the table. But because nobody has been able to document these things and research on them, so it appears as if they do not exist. It's like somebody said, Mungo Park discovered River Niger. What about the people that were living there? Why could they not discover the river? Why would a man come from Europe to come and discover a river? So for us as Africans, it's very important that we design the systems that suit what we want. Only a few days ago in Lagos, the government said there's a ban on single-use plastic. For me, I think it's more of a copy and paste from the European system to put in our country. The plastic bottles that you have, you use them once and throw them away. In my country, that becomes a water bottle for a child who cannot afford a water bottle. Is going to use that bottle for another 6 months before it gets completely deteriorated. The plastic spoon, the single-use plastics, it's easier for them to wash it and use them. But here, it's very expensive for you to clean them and use them. So you see, the conversation for us is different from the conversation for you. But for us to fit into the conversation, we need to approach it scientifically, a systematic study where we are discussing with data. I mean, this is what I think we should be talking about. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm glad that UNIDO is giving this platform, because that's not something we offer, that's our duty. But what I take from you, that it's not only enough that the African voice is in the table of COP discussing this topic, but they should also take into consideration the special situation of Africa, where, as we said, there are some certain elements, you gave examples which are specific to Africa. You don't need someone to lecture you on these ones. So thank you with this one. I'm just trying to summarize briefly the messages. That brings me to Luciana, WPO. Like half of your membership from Africa and Asia and the Middle East seems to be ready to take up this challenge. And I know that you've been engaged in these discussions with your members. I mean, from your perspective as WPO, do you think that's something too optimistic to take up this agenda, or what do you think?
Thank you, Ali. I think it's more than being optimistic. I think it's a need. We need to address this agenda, and it was so clear during these 3 days, and more than that, during all this roadmap of activities that WPO and UNIDO have been promoting together. So what I see from after these 3 days, and so many good discussions, so many topics that were raised, that from now on and coming closer to COP30, we need to align and to prepare a very clear proposal. And that will come for sure from this alignment with WPO board members, bringing perspectives from different regions of the globe, and then joining forces, as we spoke this morning, on a global level, bringing a global voice, but also a local one, bringing the perspectives and spreading the messages on as well in a local level, so we can raise the awareness. And I do agree a lot with Ahmed said. I mean, we need to take part of the conversations, and for sure this is what WPO is trying to do, to bring packaging on the table of the strategic discussions, because only then we can bring our perspective. Because it's not about packaging waste, as we discussed previously. It's about packaging driving sustainable supply chains, it's driving sustainable consumption chains, and allowing society to have access efficiently to different products for their well-being and needs. So we are not talking about easy challenges, not at all. And I do believe that these 3 days here at this Vienna Sustainable Food Packaging ConFex help us to strengthen each other, to see that we are on the same path, to see as well that we don't have the global picture, we still have to learn from each other. We have to learn from people outside our industry how to drive it. But for sure that together we can get faster and we can get much further. Also, we learned in the previous panel that as a packaging industry, we have a very clear understanding of the challenges ahead of us, or we have a very clear understanding of the challenges of this supply chain. But how can we get our message out there? And it's from our perspective, it's a lot based in science and a lot of based in data. But we learned as well that we have to build this emotional connection, to open new channels of conversations, to be able to join different tables, and with that share our perspective. So we have to learn as well how to address our claim in COP, during COP and further than COP30. And for that, we also have to reframe how we are bringing this challenge and how we are addressing the need for a sustainable food system. So very, very enlightening days, and two messages were very clear. One, that is collaboration is key. We are learning from each other, we are supporting each other, and all of us, WPO, we need every organization, every stakeholder that was here with us these 3 days. And also, we learned that new questions are the ones that are taking us further, are the ones provoking us to see from a different perspective, to challenge ourselves, to achieve something different. So those questions that were raised during these 3 days will challenge us to go beyond.
Thank you so much. I take two a very clear proposal is requested to move forward, and there are many questions still to come. It's not an easy challenge. But again, Luciana, you're also the CEO of the National Association of Brazil, and the COP30 is happening there, so I guess you have no choice but to stay around.
It's my pleasure.
And you mentioned about the voice and the packaging industry, and that brings me to Richard. Tetra Pak being a major packaging and other things that you do. Yeah, I know you don't like to be labeled as a packaging company. With the great work you're doing in the Food for Development program that we are aware of, do you think the industry has the voice within the COP in case this is happening? And yes, what makes the companies like Tetra Pak interested in joining this?
Okay, so thank you, Ali, and it's been a great day. So well done to everyone involved. It's been absolutely super. I'm going to make 3 suggestions. But before I get to those 3 suggestions, I'm just going to make 3 broad points. I think it was back in 2015 that Thomas Reardon from Michigan State University said there is a hidden middle within the food system, which is everything between the farm gate and the consumer. As politicians don't take great notice of that bit in the middle. We're all part of the hidden middle. But the important thing is, especially for packaging, for food packaging, we are essential. Even the bananas that get transported from South America to Europe come in packaging, even though they are sold loose. They are not just thrown in the back of the skip, because they would deteriorate. So packaging is really important. The second part of that food system transformation which we need is that we should really be looking at life cycle thinking. To look at the whole system in terms of where there is carbon impact, and this gets onto the food loss and waste part. Because if you only look at the sustainable packaging bit, actually you might be making the wrong decisions. Because ultimately, and this is a number I remember, typically packaging is responsible for between 3 and 5% of the greenhouse gas impact of the food system. It's an insurance. If we look on it as an insurance, it changes the way you view food packaging. Now, the food system is responsible for about 30%, a third of greenhouse gas emissions, of which a third is wasted. But only 4% of climate finance goes into the agri-food system. I'll leave you to judge whether you think that is the right proportion or whether it's not. So, 3 proposals. And the first one, I think, very much builds on what people have been saying today about science, about evidence, about avoiding unintended consequences. And that is, in every piece of legislation, there should be a food security test. Doesn't matter what the legislation is. And I say that because the food system is so complicated that even a piece of legislation which doesn't sound like it's to do with food, packaging and packaging waste regulation, for example, because it didn't even talk about food in the impact assessment. I think that was a rather large mistake myself. So a food security test. Straightforward. Does this piece of legislation affect food security or not? Yes or no? If yes, why and how? Again, it's about avoiding unintended consequences. A fairly easy one. The second one is we should look at a rebalancing, so policymakers should look at a rebalancing of how climate finance goes into the agri-food chain. Because I think that's important, given that agri-food is responsible for 30% of which a third is wasted. And finally, I think there should be ring-fenced funds within climate finance, both within NDCs, and we are coming up to a big part of NDCs, a re-evaluation, but also within multilateral financing, which is about making sure that there is ring fence for the food processing sector. I include with that food packaging because packaging companies don't actually put product in packaging, it's the food processing companies. And if we could get that, both for developed markets where there are upgrades required, but also for emerging markets where food processing can actually provide market certainty and provide food security further down and provide extra jobs. I mean, all the research I have seen is actually the multiplier effect on the food processing sector in emerging economies, and I'm sure UNIDO will say this, it's really, really significant. And if we can have ring-fenced financing for those sectors, I think we can both achieve food security, we can achieve decarbonisation, we can use less water, and we get the just transition that we absolutely need.
Typical private sector approach. You made my life easy now, because now I'm having you to raise the question to Rana.
Have you written down
really convincing argument that as an expert in the COP environment, COP community, especially that he's hinting on the climate finance, where we know if it's 4%, when where this 96% is going, maybe the 4% becomes 10, 15. But I mean, you've seen the discussions, we're not into the maybe necessarily the food system packaging family, but as a one who has been leading initiatives at the COP, does this make sense?
Well, thank you for inviting me to this family. It was a super enlightening discussion, and thanks for saying decarbonization and just transitions, because these are two words that I certainly resonate a lot with. Yeah, I mean, I think a few reflections first on what I heard, and I fully agree with what you said regarding food packaging being part of the whole equation for reducing emissions, and particularly carbon emissions in the food sector, right? So we need to burst a bit the bubble, because in the COP, and having been to COPs probably for half of them probably, we do move in bubbles, I have to say. So I'm in the energy and industry bubble, there's a food bubble, there's a water bubble, so there's different bubbles, and I think the way that we are advancing, and especially if we think not only of the climate goals, but also of the sustainable development goals, we need to move more towards better systems thinking. And how all of these systems move together. So I think for me, really what I not being into the details of this discussion, but the couple of things that stand out. I mean, COP is a milestone, right? It's not the end. It's a milestone, and we need to see how to connect best to this milestone. And it was also interesting to see how you're building up towards that, right? And I would say, for us in the energy sector, for example, what worked quite well is also working, because COP is just one of many multilateral processes. There's G20, there's G7, there's a lot of other powerful levers, because these are the actually negotiating parties at the end of the day at the COP. So I would say, for example, the G20, South Africa is hosting the next G20, so making sure that we bring some of these topics. Brazil this year, the Alliance for Ending Hunger, so we need to see how do we connect also to these agendas, and how do these help us in leading up to COP. Now, in terms of concrete actions that I would say would be very helpful is for sure this data piece. I mean, you gave me the statistics, basically the 3%, so actually we're talking about a 1% in terms of the overall emissions. So it's not a strong negative. If we compare it to the steel and cement industries, where they're contributing to 15% of the global emissions, you see also climate finance needs to cater for all of these. Nevertheless, I think we just need better data to help provide the policymakers with the opportunity for climate change or for reducing emissions from the packaging industry. We also need standards for accounting methodologies for this life cycle assessments. So how are we actually saying, what does sustainable packaging mean? What are the principles that are behind that? And if we want to quantify the carbon emissions that are related to the sustainable packaging, I mean, what does that mean? And how do we converge around the standardized methodologies to measure this carbon? The second point, and you also alluded to it, for those that maybe don't know what NDCs stand for, so these are nationally determined contributions. These are basically documents that governments develop every 5 years and submit this to the UNFCCC, so the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, for outlining where their priorities for climate mitigation lie. And in this case, at the moment, countries have just embarked on an update of their last NDC. They're expected to, by mid-next year, actually submit their updated NDCs. And this is a very, very important cycle of the NDCs, because it's the last one before 2030. And the world is going on a trajectory where emissions are just going up, 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 up. And we need to make sure that before 2030 hits, we need to start turning that emission trajectory down. And for that to happen, we need to identify very concrete actions in which governments are going to tackle different challenges. And so for that, I know, for example, that colleagues in FAO are working on topics related to food losses in NDCs and highlighting within the NDCs topics on food systems. So I would say, joining the choir and making sure that packaging is also part of that. And I guess what I take away as well is it's different. I mean, in Africa, there's a lot of food losses before the food is actually coming to the packaging, because yes, there's a lot of fruits that are rotting because there's no cooling or infrastructure to actually bring it at home. So there are regional differences, and we do need to account for that. Then finally for the private sector, and there, for example, one thing we work with also is pushing those first movers and to create those commitments and encouraging others to join the role. So if it's Tetra Pak, but I'm sure that there are others that could actually create also a campaign perhaps in the lead up for COP30, where some of the private sector could come in and say, this is our commitment to how sustainable packaging relates to the climate agenda and how it relates to carbon emissions. Yeah, I think I'll stop here, but it's super interesting discussion, and thanks for inviting me again.
Thank you, I have space to write and capture everything in my paper, but I think there are too many things to absorb. I think you gave some interesting practical tips and hints, but at the same time you challenged that we should build a business case. But I think, thank you for accepting the invitation, but you can realize that this is a trap, so we're not done with you here. To decode this and try to put this into a concrete action plan, especially this NDCs, where it seems to be an important milestone, and also referring that the COP30 is only also a milestone, and there are G7, G20, so we will have to incorporate this into a possible roadmap. So I guess to conclude the panel, it's clear, at least to me, that this is not an easy journey. It's complex. Still need to connect different pieces together, different interests, but at least everybody says that something needs to be done in this regard. So we will try our best, WPO and UNIDO first, to try to absorb and digest this internally, and then try to consult more with the different partners, and hopefully come up with a roadmap to COP30 and beyond. And of course, alone we cannot do it, so we count on every single one of you and beyond to try to support on this. So thank you so much for the really exceptional panel members. You made my life easy, and again, it's not the end of it. We will be chasing you for this. Thank you so much. I think with this, perfect timing. I think we're just 2 minutes late, no?
Oh, we are too
I think 2 minutes only late.
Ah,
And I was asked also to do some closing remarks. It's simple for me. I mean, there's no formal closing remarks. I just once again would like to thank our partners who took the risk and joined forces with us on this ConFex of 3 days, where UNIDO is taking care of day 3. Our partners in Austria, they did a nice Austrian National Packaging Day and the field visits with the IEA. So it was really an interesting 3 days. So thank you for our co-partners and organizers for being with us on this. And I thank those who accepted the invitation and come from different places and different countries for joining the discussions. So we will definitely keep you informed, and we will share the outcomes of these discussions and keep you informed on the journey we are taking. And the last thing, I would like just to thank the small team who did a great job in putting this together in a very, very short time. Alexa, and especially, I think you all know Alexa. And Isabel for also accepting last minute request, and my colleague Chu, with maybe no one saw, but she's mastering all the things. And all the other colleagues from the team who really were supporting, so that without them I will be simply doing nothing there. And I think one last thing, I was told there's two interesting things happened during this ConFex, that I understood that WPO headquarters in Vienna, for the first time in their history, receiving their members 25 plus in their office. I think I wanted to stop on this fact so I can remind WPO family that we united the family in your office after all this time. And I think the visit to the lab seems to me, I still didn't visit the lab, yeah, believe it, but it seems to be really an amazing experience. So again, with this, I thank you so much, and I think there might be just some details later on any further plans beyond today. And again, for those who are traveling, have a safe journey back. I hope you enjoyed being at the Vienna International Center, and I hope you enjoyed the experience of the chairs in this meeting room. We all have heard some noises around. I cannot promise this will change, but maybe it will. But someone told me this is an antique meeting room that gives a feeling that we are at the Security Council. But I think we're more efficient than that council. So, on this note, thank you so much.